Why was everyone laughing at her before she had even spoken? The sound rolled through the marble rotunda of the National Command Academy like a wave breaking against stone. Sharp, polished, arrogant laughter. A dozen cadets, young, clean, uniformed perfection, crowded beneath the towering columns, their eyes bright with the cruelty that comes so easily to the untested. And at the center of it all, the source of their amusement, sat a woman in a standard-issue manual wheelchair. Sergeant Eva Ristova. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her face was composed, calm, unreadable, so still it almost defied the air around her. From across the rotunda, Cadet Captain Drake Miller stood with the careless posture of someone who had never been told no. His voice cut through the whispers like the gleam of his brass insignia. "A guest lecturer, huh?" he said, half smiling. "What's she going to teach us, Sergeant, how to properly file disability paperwork?" The line landed like a blade, a few stifled laughs, a few nervous glances, then more laughter, bolder this time. The rotunda echoed with it. Eva's hands rested quietly in her lap, fingers laced, her wrists unmoving. They were scarred hands, the kind that had seen real work, cordite burns, calluses, old fractures that hadn't healed quite right. But no one saw that. No one wanted to. They saw only the chair. Above them, on the third-floor balcony, partially hidden by a massive Republic flag, Colonel Thorne watched in silence. His jaw tightened. He knew that stillness, that kind of silence, never belonged to the weak. It belonged to people who had seen too much and learned what real control looked like. The cadets didn't know, not yet. Drake Miller stepped closer. His boots clicked against marble, a rehearsed rhythm of dominance. "The entire ethos of this institution," he said, gesturing toward the great staircase behind her, "is ascent, climbing higher, overcoming obstacles." His voice dripped false mentorship. "I'm just not sure you're physically equipped to grasp the concept." The laughter swelled again, then faltered just slightly. Because she wasn't reacting, not even a flicker. No anger, no embarrassment, no plea for mercy, just silence. That silence began to fill the room in a different way now. Heavy, uneasy, the kind that makes a man feel smaller the longer it lasts. Drake shifted his stance, uncertain. That wasn't supposed to happen. "Maybe," one of his lieutenants, Jensen, snorted, "maybe we should give her a hand. A little push to get her started on her ascent." Another laugh forced. That was the line. The moment when cruelty crosses from words into something darker. Eva's eyes lowered slowly, not to their faces, to Jensen's boot, just a flicker of movement, measuring distance, pressure, angle, the observation of someone who'd done that before in a place where hesitation meant death. No one noticed. Drake did, though, and it unnerved him. He needed to reclaim control. He stepped forward and kicked the wheelchair. It wasn't a nudge. It was deliberate, full-bodied. His boot struck the frame behind the main wheel. Jensen's foot still blocked the front axle. The chair twisted, flipped, metal shrieking against stone. Time slowed. Eva fell, but not the way they expected. Her body folded and rolled shoulder first, the kind of fall that comes from 1,000 drills, not panic. She absorbed the impact with fluid precision, controlled even in collapse. The chair clattered beside her, a broken symbol of pity. The laughter stopped. For the first time, the cadets saw something they couldn't name, a strength that existed beyond physical form. She pushed herself upright with both arms, slow, deliberate, her breathing steady, her face unchanged. She didn't reach for the chair. She simply sat there, legs folded beneath her, staring up the marble staircase, the same one Drake had mocked her for never climbing. No words, no gestures, just that gaze. From the balcony, Colonel Thorne's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to act. Every instinct screamed to end it, but he didn't, not yet. He wanted them to see it, the power of restraint. Below, the cadets shifted uneasily. The silence thickened. Shame began to leak into the room like smoke. And through it all, Eva sat unmoved. That was how legends begin, not with fury, but with a silence so deep it demands the world fill it with meaning. The following morning, the Academy's training center buzzed with unease. Rumors had already spread, half-truths told in hushed voices. She fell. He didn't mean it. She's fine, the colonel was watching. None of it mattered. What lingered was guilt. Every cadet felt it, though none would admit it. They gathered in the observation theater, gray uniforms perfect, faces tense. The air smelled of coffee and gun oil. This was the day of the Crucible, their capstone simulation. A digital hell. It was the Academy's crown jewel, a sprawling combat labyrinth built from shifting steel and holographic threats, real weapons with simulation rounds, real consequences. For 10 years, no cadet team had ever scored a perfect mission. "All right, listen up." Gunnery Sergeant Reyes paced before them, his voice gravel wrapped in thunder. "The rules are simple. You go in hot, neutralize all threats, no civilian casualties, secure the hostages. You fail one, you fail all." He wasn't trying to motivate, he was stating fact. The Crucible didn't care about confidence, it punished arrogance. Drake Miller's team, Team A, was first, the gold standard. They moved like a choreographed performance. Hand signals, tactical jargon, door breaches, perfect on paper. Then the simulation began, and the Crucible ate them alive. In less than 90 seconds, their formation collapsed. Civilian targets screamed. One of Drake's cadets fired on a non-combatant hologram holding a cell phone. The siren blared. Collateral damage. Red letters flashed across the screen. Mission failed. Drake froze in disbelief. His perfect team humiliated. Reyes rubbed his temples. "You're thinking like clumsy cattle. Textbook tactics don't win real fights. Get out of my sight." One by one, other teams tried and failed. Too cautious, too fragmented, too predictable, the Crucible punished them all. The room grew quiet. The pride of the Academy was collapsing under the weight of its own ego. Then, "Request permission to run the course, sir." The voice came from the back of the dark amphitheater, soft, steady. Every head turned. Sergeant Eva Rostova sat in her wheelchair near the access ramp, a fresh uniform, calm eyes. Reyes blinked. "Sergeant, this is a dynamic four-man entry exercise. It requires mobility," and he stopped himself before saying it. "Legs." "I'm aware of the parameters, Gunny," she replied. "I'll run it solo." The room erupted with snickers, disbelief. A woman in a wheelchair was volunteering to do what their best teams couldn't. Drake looked up, shame and arrogance battling inside him. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath. Reyes exhaled, ready to dismiss her, then his earpiece crackled. A voice, deep, cold, commanding. "Colonel Thorne. Let her run." Reyes froze, "Sir." "You heard me." The gunny turned back to her, his tone flat. "The range is yours, Sergeant. Show us what you've got." The laughter died immediately. On the main screen, the Crucible reset. A single blue icon labeled Rostova appeared at the entry point. 10 minutes on the clock. She didn't move. For 30 long seconds, Eva sat motionless at the threshold. The cadets shifted, whispering. They thought she'd frozen. But her heart rate on the monitor read 62 beats per minute. Calm. She was listening. Mapping. The hum of air vents, the distant hiss of the simulated environment. Every detail was a thread she was weaving into a mental map. Then a small movement. Her gloved hand reached to the side of her chair. A sleek modified sidearm slid free, a pistol with a long barrel, optical sight, and weighted stock. Not regulation, custom. She adjusted the optic with tiny clicks, chambered a round, the ritual of someone who didn't believe in luck. Her data pad blinked to life. With a few taps, She rerouted a ventilation fan to create noise at the far end of the corridor. Inside the simulation, AI combatants reacted instantly, turning toward the sound. The cadets leaned forward. "She's manipulating the AI," one whispered. Eva's lips barely moved, but there was a hint of something there, a faint, knowing smile. Then she entered. No rush, no bravado, just quiet precision. Her chair glided along the wall, nearly silent. She reached the first corner, the same kill zone that had destroyed Drake's team, and paused. Instead of peeking, she pulled a small mirror from her kit. Simple, low-tech, effective. She saw two tangos waiting, calculated, adjusted, fired once through a narrow gap between crates. A single pixel flared red on the monitor. One down. The second target reacted, raising its weapon too late. 2 more shots. 3 seconds, room clear. The theater was silent. Even Reyes had stopped mid-sip, his coffee forgotten. Drake Miller stared at the screen like it was a ghost story come alive. What they were watching wasn't luck, it was mastery. Eva advanced, methodical, relentless. Each movement was deliberate. She fired off ricochets to drop enemies above her, used sound, shadow, and misdirection like instruments in a symphony. No wasted motion, no panic, only rhythm. She reached the final room, 2 hostages, 3 tangos. No hesitation. A low-velocity round into the hinge. A microcharge. The door blew outward, slamming into one target. 2 more shots. Silence. A chime filled the air. Mission complete. Time 4:17. Collateral damage, 0. Score perfect. No one spoke. On screen, Eva holstered her weapon and exhaled softly. Heart rate, 60 BPM. Calm. She looked up toward the observation window, expression unchanged. Colonel Thorne stood. He didn't speak. He simply descended the steps, each stride echoing. Reyes unlocked the simulation door. The colonel entered the Crucible. Every cadet in the theater watched on the monitor as he approached her. Eva sat quietly, reloading her weapon unfazed. Thorne stopped 5 feet away and saluted. Sharp, perfect, reverent. It wasn't the salute of a superior. It was the salute of a soldier to another soldier, one legend to another. Then he spoke, his voice steady as steel. "It's an honor to be in your presence again, Wraith." The name fell like a thunderclap. Wraith. The cadets froze, a ghost story, a myth, a classified shadow whispered in the barracks for years. And now she had a face. The cadets froze. The name hung in the air like a shockwave. Wraith. They had heard it whispered before, a code name traded in hushed rumors between barracks lights out and morning drills. A phantom from the black files. The kind of soldier the government didn't acknowledge and the academy pretended didn't exist. Colonel Thorne lowered his salute and turned, his voice cutting through the silence like the crack of a rifle. "Gunnery Sergeant Reyes," he said, his tone calm but sharp enough to make every cadet's spine straighten. "Bring up Sergeant Restova's full service record, all of it, level 5 clearance." Reyes hesitated. "Sir, that file is..." "Now." The gunny swallowed hard and turned to the console. His fingers moved fast, inputting codes, overriding layers of digital warning screens that flashed classified material, unauthorized access prohibited. 3 red prompts. Each one demanded an override authorization. Each one carried the same threat, violation punishable by court-martial. He entered the last code with trembling hands. The projector whirred to life, and the massive screen above the observation theater came alive. Lines of text scrolled past. Entire paragraphs were redacted in heavy black, but what remained visible was enough to drain every bit of color from the cadets' faces. Sergeant First Class EVA ROSTTOVA CALLSIGN. Wraith. Beneath it, a short list of assignments, half of them simply labeled undisclosed theater or phantom cell deployment. Whispers spread like static. Phantom cell, that's not real. I thought that was a myth. Black operations, off-the-books missions. It was real. The entries kept scrolling, names of operations blurred by censorship, each followed by the same notation. Result, objective achieved. Casualties minimal. Survivors classified. And then came the awards. Rows of medals that didn't make sense to the human brain. Bronze Star for Valor 5 times. Silver Star 3. A Distinguished Service Cross. A gasp rippled through the room. The Distinguished Service Cross was second only to the Medal of Honor. Most soldiers went their entire careers without meeting anyone who'd earned one, and she had it. The citation appeared next, redacted, but enough words were visible to paint the picture. While under sustained enemy assault, Sergeant Rostova held the defensive perimeter for 6 hours, enabling full evacuation of Allied forces. When an RPG impacted her position, she shielded 2 wounded soldiers with her own body, sustaining catastrophic injuries to her lower extremities. Her actions directly resulted in the survival of every member of her unit. The room went still. Drake Miller stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open, his stomach twisted. The woman he had mocked, the one he had kicked down the stairs, had saved an entire team by giving up her legs. Colonel Thorne's voice broke the silence, not a shout, but a quiet, simmering fury. "For 2 days," he began, packing the floor in front of them, "you've looked at this woman and seen weakness. No one moved. You saw a wheelchair," Thorne continued, "and you decided that meant something. You judged a warrior by the absence of her limbs and not by the presence of her will." He stopped, eyes locking on Drake Miller. "You, Cadet Miller, you spoke about ascent, didn't you? About climbing higher." Drake's throat tightened. He couldn't answer. Thorne took a slow step forward. "Let me tell you what ascent looks like. It's dragging 2 unconscious soldiers up a mountainside while artillery falls around you. It's holding the line when your body is broken. It's using what's left of yourself to shield others from death. That," he pointed toward Eva, "is ascent." Silence heavy, immovable. "You aren't fit to stand in her presence," Thorne finished, his voice cold as steel. "Dismissed." No one moved. He turned away, his boots echoing sharply against the floor, and for the first time since arriving, the cadets truly understood what command presence felt like. They filed out slowly, the echo of their footsteps hollow and uneven. The air felt heavier now, as though shame itself had weight. Drake lingered the longest. He couldn't look at her, not after what he'd done, but he could feel her presence, calm, composed, unshaken. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Some lessons burn deeper when no words are exchanged. By nightfall, the story had spread through the entire academy like a shockwave. Every hallway, every dorm, every whisper carried the same names: Rostova, Wraith. Footage of the simulation leaked, grainy and silent, showing her perfect run in the Crucible. It circulated on private cadet channels, studied frame by frame like sacred scripture. The next morning, every conversation stopped when she entered a room, not out of fear, out of reverence. But Eva didn't care about that. She hadn't come for their awe. She came because she had something to teach them, something they'd never learned from a manual. The academy, however, was not done reckoning. Colonel Thorne summoned a formal disciplinary board. Drake Miller and his 3 lieutenants stood in full dress uniform, pale and sleepless. The colonel's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "There will be no long speeches," he said. "No excuses. This isn't a trial, it's a reckoning." He paced slowly behind the podium, eyes sharp as razors. "You broke the code you swore to uphold," he said, stopping behind Drake. "Honor, integrity, respect. They're not words on a poster, they are oxygen in this profession, and yesterday you choked on them. Drake's jaw trembled. Sir, I. Don't, Thorne snapped, not turning. Don't insult this moment with words. The silence that followed was merciless. You have humiliated this academy, Thorne continued. But more importantly, you humiliated yourselves. You mocked a soldier who bled for the flag you wear on your sleeve. You called her broken. She is the reason you even have a uniform to disgrace. His words landed like hammer blows. When it was over, the verdict was swift. Leadership stripped, training privileges revoked, months of punishment detail assigned, permanent disciplinary notation on their records, the kind of scar that never fades. But for Drake Miller, the punishment wasn't on paper. It was inside him. The next morning he couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He could still see her face, calm, still, unyielding, when she pushed herself off the floor after he'd kicked her down. He had seen real strength once in his life, and it wasn't his. He found her later that afternoon in a small, disused classroom converted into a workshop. Sunlight filtered through dust-filled air, painting soft gold across the floor. She sat at a table, methodically cleaning her weapon, the same custom pistol she'd used in the simulation. Each motion precise, ritualistic, almost meditative. Drake stood in the doorway for a long time, unsure how to start. Finally his voice cracked. "Sergeant, there's nothing I can say." She didn't look up. He swallowed hard. "What I did, what I said, it was unforgivable." A pause, his hands trembled. "I saw the chair and I stopped there, I didn't see you, and I was wrong, I was a fool, I'm sorry." The room was silent, except for the quiet metallic clicks of her work. When she finally looked up, her gaze was level, calm, assessing. "Assumptions are a liability, Cadet," she said softly. "In the field, they get people killed." He nodded quickly, eyes wet. "You saw what you wanted to see," she continued. "And you missed the actual threat. That's what arrogance does." Drake stood frozen, guilt consuming him. "Your apology," she said after a moment, "is a start, but words are easy. Actions define a soldier." Her tone wasn't cruel, it was deliberate, like a scalpel cutting away illusion. "The question isn't whether you're sorry," she said. "It's what you'll do with the lesson." He drew in a shaky breath. "I'll rebuild myself, Sergeant, I swear it." Eva gave the faintest nod. "Then start with humility." He saluted her, a small, imperfect gesture, and left. Outside, the corridors felt colder, emptier, but lighter somehow. The kind of emptiness that marks the beginning of something new. In the days that followed, change came quietly. Drake Miller, the Academy's golden boy, was no longer loud. He stopped trying to lead with noise. He arrived first at physical training and left last from the library. He stopped showing off. He started listening. He didn't seek redemption through words. He sought it through repetition, discipline, silence. The arrogance burned out of him, leaving something humbler behind, something real. And the rest of the academy noticed. Even Eva did, though she never said it. She didn't need to. Colonel Thorne saw it too. He saw it in the way cadets moved, slower, more deliberate. The laughter that once filled the halls after drills had changed. Less mockery, more respect. He found Eva one morning overlooking the training fields from the high glass walkway. The sun glinted off the metal frames of her wheelchair, catching the silver of her service pins. "You changed the air in this place," Thorne said quietly, standing beside her. Eva didn't look away from the field. "I didn't change it, Colonel. They did. I just reminded them what silence sounds like." Thorne nodded. "And what will you do now?" Eva's eyes tracked a group of young cadets moving through an obstacle course below, one struggling to keep up, another pausing to help. "Teach," she said simply. And in that single word, a new mission began. Why were her classes always the quietest rooms on campus? Not silent out of boredom or fear, silent because no one dared break the rhythm of her calm. Sergeant Eva Rostova didn't teach from podiums or whiteboards. She didn't use slides or speeches. She didn't even stand. She simply existed in a way that demanded attention. Her classroom wasn't a hall at all. It was wherever the truth of the lesson lived that day. Sometimes the firing range, sometimes the kill house, sometimes a muddy, wind-scoured field at dawn where cadets stood shivering, waiting for her to explain why they were there. She never did. Instead, she'd give them a scenario, a question that felt simple until they tried to answer it. 3 hostiles, 1 ally, no communications, limited ammo. What do you do? Cadets would shout tactics, jargon, diagrams. She would listen quietly, eyes patient, until they finished tangling themselves in complexity. Then she'd tilt her head slightly, like she was listening to something only she could hear, and ask, "Why are you still thinking about enemies before thinking about yourself?" That question stayed with them long after the exercise ended. Because she wasn't teaching combat, she was teaching clarity. On the firing line, she never corrected their aim. She corrected their breathing. "Don't control the rifle," she'd say, her tone low, even. "Control your heartbeat. You don't hit the target by focusing on it. You hit it by becoming still enough that the shot happens naturally." The first time she demonstrated, it was almost eerie. Her wheelchair barely moved. Her torso straightened, her shoulders loosened, her breath slowed. The pistol rose, steadied, and fired. The casing flipped into the air. The sound was sharp, clean. The bullet punched dead center. Then another and another. Every shot hit the same hole. When the last echo died, she simply said, "You don't need legs to stand your ground." That one line spread through the academy like a gospel verse. Drake Miller watched her from afar most days. He didn't dare speak much anymore, not until he earned the right. But he absorbed everything, every detail of her movement, her silence, her method. He stopped commanding with his voice. He started commanding with observation. He saw things others missed. The wind's direction by the sway of a flag, the rhythm of footsteps in a corridor before a breach, the tremor of fear in a cadet's hand before a trigger pull. Eva noticed. One afternoon, she called him forward after a simulation run. The rest of the cadets stood behind the glass, still processing their failed mission. He approached, heart pounding. "You waited," she said simply. "Yes, Sergeant," he replied. "I didn't want to breach blind. The movement pattern didn't feel right." "Didn't feel right," she repeated softly. "Not look, not sound, feel." She looked at him for a long moment, not proud, not warm, just thoughtful. "That's intuition," she said. "It's not luck, it's experience disguised as instinct. Remember that." He nodded, quietly stunned. Then she turned her chair away, signaling the conversation was over. That was her way. She never handed out praise. She handed out direction. Her lessons began to spread beyond tactics. She spoke of things the manuals never mentioned: fear, doubt, control. "Fear is useful," she told them during one late-night session in the kill house, the lights dimmed to simulate blackout conditions. "Fear tells you that something matters. It's not the enemy. It's a signal. Listen to it, but don't bow to it." A cadet raised his hand. "Did you ever feel afraid, Sergeant?" Eva looked at him, not scolding, not defensive, just human. "Yes," she said quietly. "Every time. The trick is to feel it, acknowledge it, and move anyway." She let the words hang in the air before adding, almost as an afterthought, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the mastery of it." No one in that room forgot that moment. For the first time, the academy wasn't training soldiers. It was shaping leaders. And she was at the center of it. It was Colonel Thorne who saw it first, the cultural shift. The noise in the halls had changed. There was less boasting, fewer swaggering debates over shooting scores or ranking charts. The cadets still competed, but quietly, purposefully. Even the instructors adjusted. They found themselves quoting her without realizing it. observation over assumption, silence over noise, competence over confidence. They called it the Rostova Doctrine, and in time it became required reading. The irony wasn't lost on Thorne. The woman the cadets had once ridiculed had redefined the institution they worshipped. One afternoon, he found her in the observation tower overlooking the Crucible, her favorite place. The same place she had rewritten their understanding of what strength looked like. She sat there alone, a cup of coffee cooling beside her. Below, a new class of cadets prepared for a run. "You've built something," Thorne said as he approached. Eva didn't turn. "No," she murmured. "I've just reminded them that noise doesn't equal power." He smiled faintly. "Still the same mission, huh?" "Always." Below, the team started their simulation. The breach was sloppy, loud. Eva didn't sigh or shake her head. She simply pressed a button on the console. The simulation froze. "Cadet Rays," her voice echoed through the loudspeaker, calm as ever. "You breached because the manual told you to. Did you ask if that was even the correct door?" The young man froze on screen. His voice came back through the intercom, uncertain. "Ma'am, I assumed." "There's your failure," she said. "You assumed." Her tone wasn't cruel, it was surgical. The real objective wasn't behind that door. It was to see if you could think beyond instruction. The simulation blinked out. The cadets stood in silence. Thorne folded his arms, watching. "You know," he said, "you terrify them." "I hope not," she replied. "Fear clouds learning, but discomfort sharpens it." He nodded slowly. "You really believe you can rebuild them all?" Eva's gaze stayed on the training floor. "No, but if I can rebuild one, the rest will follow." Drake Miller did follow. He became the example she didn't ask for. The arrogance was gone. He'd been humbled to the bone, but what replaced it was something purer, discipline without ego. Other cadets started mirroring him the way they once mirrored their loudest peers. They saw him quietly helping others, studying alone at night, drilling without needing recognition. It wasn't performative, it was penance. And Eva knew it. Late one evening, she found him still in the range long after lights out. The room smelled of burnt powder and oil. He was seated cross-legged beside a disassembled rifle, meticulously cleaning it piece by piece. "Perfection is impossible," she said from the doorway. He didn't flinch. "I know, I'm not chasing perfection, I'm chasing understanding." She nodded slightly. "That's closer." She rolled forward, studying the weapon's parts. "You're not cleaning the rifle," she said. "You're cleaning your guilt. That's good, just don't live there." He looked up, uncertain. "Ma'am." "Guilt can start a fire," she said, "but you can't live in it forever. At some point, you have to use the heat to forge something new." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." And for the first time since the staircase, she saw something different in his eyes, the same calm she carried. Not imitation, understanding. By the end of the year, the academy was unrecognizable. The loudest cadets were no longer the most admired. The quiet ones, the ones who thought first, spoke last, and acted with intent, had become the new gold standard. A single photo began circulating on the main bulletin board. A still frame taken from Eva's simulation, one brass casing suspended midair, caught in the light. Someone had written beneath it in neat block letters. "The sound of competence." No one knew who posted it. No one removed it. It stayed there year after year. And every time a new cadet passed by, they'd stop for a moment, not out of curiosity, but respect. They'd remember the story. The woman who had been kicked down the stairs. The soldier who didn't need legs to fight. The ghost who taught them that silence could be stronger than any roar. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the training fields, Eva rolled her chair out onto the same marble rotunda where it had all begun. The air was warm, quiet. The staircase gleamed in the golden light. She looked up at it, the very place she had fallen, the same cold marble that had once been her humiliation. But now the Academy referred to it differently. The Rostova Steps. It wasn't an official designation. It didn't need to be. Every cadet knew. Every visitor paused there. It wasn't a monument to her pain. It was a reminder of what dignity looks like when the world expects collapse and gets composure instead. She reached down, brushing her fingertips along the smooth metal of her chair. It wasn't a prison. It never had been. It was a weapon, a throne, a legacy. Above her, banners rippled in the evening wind, their shadows stretching long across the marble floor. And for a brief moment, she thought of that day, the laughter, the fall, the silence that followed. A silence that changed everything. She breathed deeply, the faintest smile touching her lips. Sometimes, she thought, the loudest lesson is the one you never speak. Why did her name still echo in the halls years after she stopped speaking in them? Time had moved on. Classes graduated, instructors rotated, generations shifted, but the legend never left. At the National Command Academy, they no longer taught doctrine of tactical adaptability. They called it the Rostova Doctrine. Every cadet knew the story, though the retellings differed in detail. Some said she'd once taken down 50 hostiles alone. Others said she was a ghost, part machine, part myth. The truth was quieter and far more powerful. Eva Rostova was still there, still on campus, but she no longer lectured. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. You could find her most mornings in the high observation deck overlooking the Crucible, a mug of black coffee on her lap, her eyes fixed on the screens below. The cadets called it Rostova's perch. No one dared disturb her when she was there. Not because they feared her, but because watching her in silence felt like part of the lesson itself. She would sit motionless for hours, observing runs, watching mistakes repeat themselves, impatience, ego, noise, the same flaws she had once burned out of the academy like infection from a wound. When the teams finished, her feedback came through the intercom. Calm, sparse, surgical. Cadet Reyes, your team's breach lacked synchronization. Cadet Liu, you spoke before you assessed. Your voice gave away your position. Cadet Alvarez, your hesitation saved you. Don't let anyone convince you that stillness is weakness. Every word landed like a stone in still water, rippling through minds long after the session ended. Colonel Thorne sometimes joined her, though he never sat. He preferred to stand beside her, hands clasped behind his back, watching the academy evolve into something better than it had ever been. You've changed the foundation of this place, he told her once, his voice low. Eva didn't look away from the monitor. No, she said softly. The foundation was always solid. It just needed a reminder of what it was built for. He glanced down at her wheelchair, polished metal catching the light. You ever regret not leaving? You could have had any post you wanted. Pentagon, intelligence, command. Eva took a sip of coffee before answering. Command is overrated, Colonel. Impact isn't measured by rank. Thorne chuckled quietly. You sound like a sermon. Then maybe they finally need one. He smiled at that. By the 5th year of her tenure, the doctrine she'd shaped was no longer confined to simulation rooms. It began appearing in field reports, subtle fingerprints left on the next generation of soldiers. In one classified clip circulated among instructors, a young captain was seen leading his platoon through an urban war zone. The footage was shaky, grainy, shot from a helmet camera. The captain halted his team before a breach. On screen, you could see his hand raised in a silent command. His second-in-command whispered, "Sir, what's wrong?" The captain didn't answer. He pointed to a barely noticeable heat shimmer near the doorframe, a tripwire. He ordered a flank instead, entering from a back alley through a broken vent shaft. The mission succeeded without a single casualty. Later, analysts noticed the patch on his sleeve, Captain D. Miller. He had learned. The academy didn't make an announcement, but word got around. Cadet to lieutenant, lieutenant to captain, captain to legend in the making. And behind it all, a single line written years ago in the Crucible's archive log. Observation over assumption. Eva never spoke of Drake's transformation, but she watched it unfold with quiet pride. She received his letters, sometimes short, precise updates from the field. "Ma'am, your lesson on silence saved us again today. We were pinned in a market. Noise draws bullets, stillness draws clarity. We chose stillness, we chose right. Respectfully, D. Miller." She never wrote back. She didn't need to. Some acknowledgments live best unspoken. The academy continued to evolve. The old arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a quieter kind of confidence, one that didn't need applause. New cadets came in every year, each of them greeted during orientation by the same story. The tale of the sergeant in the wheelchair who had once been mocked and then rewrote the meaning of strength. The staircase where she had been pushed was now a place of ritual. Every new class was brought there on their first day. Colonel Thorne would stand at the base, his voice echoing across the marble. "Here is where arrogance fell," he would say, "and where humility learned to stand." The cadets would look up at the towering steps in silence. Some would glance around, half expecting to see her watching from the shadows. Sometimes she was. But she never interrupted the ceremony. She simply listened to the sound of transformation, to the echoes of lessons finally learned. One night, long after the halls had emptied, she rolled quietly through the rotunda alone. The moonlight streamed through the high glass dome, silvering the marble. Her reflection shimmered faintly across the floor. She stopped at the base of the staircase and looked up, at the place where her humiliation had once been carved into memory. But tonight, it didn't feel like a scar. It felt like a scar that had turned to armor. She thought about the years since that fall, the cadets she'd taught, the lives they'd saved, the culture that had shifted from noise to stillness. And she realized something simple, almost poetic. The fall hadn't been her end. It had been her introduction. The world just needed to watch her fall before it could understand what rising actually looked like. Colonel Thorne found her there. He didn't speak at first. He just stood beside her, following her gaze up the stairs. "Every year," he said quietly, "new cadets come here and ask the same question." She turned slightly, which is, "Why hasn't she retired yet?" Eva smiled faintly. "And what do you tell them?" "I tell them you'll retire when you stop teaching lessons by existing." That earned a soft laugh, rare, brief, real. Then he asked, "Do you ever think about that day?" Her eyes lingered on the first few steps. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with anger. The fall was necessary. Without it, they'd still think strength makes noise." "And now?" "Now they know silence has a sound too." Thorne nodded, "A loud one." She looked at him then, really looked. The years had crept into his face, carved lines of command and care. "You stayed," she said quietly. "Most colonels don't." He shrugged. "You did too." "I had a reason." He raised an eyebrow. "And what reason that?" Eva's gaze softened, her tone almost tender. "Because somewhere, every year, a new Drake Miller walks into this building thinking strength is arrogance. I stay to make sure he leaves knowing it's grace." The colonel was silent for a long time. Then quietly he saluted her again, not for ceremony, for respect. Outside, dawn broke. The first cadets of the new class were running drills on the fields, their breath rising in the cold morning air. Eva watched them from the window, the young, the loud, the uncertain. In them she saw herself, before the chair, before the fire, before the silence. She didn't envy them. She just hoped they'd earn their silence sooner. A soft knock came at her office door. It was a young woman, barely 20, nervous but composed. "Sergeant Rostova?" she asked, standing at attention. Eva turned her chair slightly. "At ease, cadet." The girl hesitated. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. Your lecture about stillness, it changed the way I think. I used to think being quiet meant being weak." Eva studied her for a long moment, then said gently, "Then you're already ahead of most." The cadet smiled faintly. "Permission to ask something, ma'am." "Granted." "Was it true, the story about the stairs?" Eva's eyes didn't change, but there was a flicker of memory in them, a weight that never fully left. "It happened," she said simply, "but that's not the story." The cadet frowned. "It's not." "No," Eva said. "The story isn't that I fell, it's that I got up." The girl nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, ma'am." Eva watched her leave, brisk steps, nervous shoulders, the same fragile determination she'd seen 1,000 times before. And she smiled again. Because that was the point. Every new generation needed to see someone rise after the fall. Later that night, as the academy lights dimmed, Eva returned to her perch above the Crucible one last time. Below, the empty kill house was dark and still, silent, waiting. She placed her coffee beside her chair, folded her hands in her lap, and closed her eyes. She could still hear it, the echo of boots on marble, the laughter, the silence, the shot that changed everything. It all lived in her, not as pain, as purpose. Her voice, when she finally whispered to herself, was steady. "Sometimes you don't teach through words or medals. Sometimes you teach by surviving." Outside, the wind stirred the academy banners, and for a heartbeat, it almost sounded like applause. Why did her words return to them only when the world went silent? It was years after the academy days, another continent, another war. A dusty city half buried under smoke and sirens. The air tasted of sand and iron. Captain Drake Miller crouched behind a collapsed market stall, his squad scattered across the narrow street. Gunfire cracked from the windows ahead. Somewhere beyond the smoke, civilians screamed. He closed his eyes for half a second. "Breathe." Eva Rostova's voice lived in that breath. "Noise is panic. Silence is information." He inhaled slowly through his nose, exhaled through his mouth. When he opened his eyes again, the chaos had shape. "Cease fire," he ordered quietly. His sergeant looked at him in disbelief. "Sir, they're dug in." "I said cease." The street fell still except for the wind whipping torn cloth through the air. Drake listened, not to the enemy, but to the absence of them. Footsteps, 3 sets moving along the left alley. A metallic click, magazine reload close. He pointed toward the alley, traced 2 fingers in a circle. His men nodded, moved like shadows. Seconds later, 3 muffled pops, silence again. Drake checked his watch. 2 minutes, no casualties. He exhaled, move. They advanced. An hour later, the firefight was over. The civilians were safe, the hostiles subdued. And when the dust finally settled, one of his corporals approached him, shaking his head in wonder. "How'd you even know they were there, sir?" Drake looked out across the shattered street. "I didn't," he said quietly. "I listened until the world told me." The corporal frowned. "That's poetic, sir." Drake almost smiled. "Not poetry, training." He didn't add whose. He didn't need to. Back at base, the after-action report described his maneuver as tactical improvisation resulting from environmental observation. Drake read the report once, then closed it. He knew what it really was: Rostova Doctrine, Field Application 1. He remembered her voice over the range years ago. Observation over assumption. And now he finally understood how deep that went. The doctrine spread quietly through the ranks. Soldiers who had never set foot in the academy began quoting lines they didn't know came from her. "Stillness saves lives." "Assess before action." "Control your heartbeat, control the outcome." They called it ghost training, Nobody knew who started it, only that it worked. And far away, in her quiet office overlooking the Crucible, Eva Rostova saw the first field footage come across her secure feed, the one of Drake's team using silence as strategy. She watched the clip twice, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned back, eyes half closed, and whispered to no one, "Good." Months later, she was summoned to an internal briefing. Colonel Thorne was there, older now, his hair streaked with gray, his voice softer but still sharp. "Intel Command wants your doctrine formalized," he said. "They're requesting you write the manual." Eva raised an eyebrow. "You can't teach silence from a book, Colonel." "They think you can." She sipped her coffee. "Then they don't understand it." Thorne chuckled quietly. "Write it anyway, even if it's just for the archives." She stared out the window at the cadets on the field below, running, shouting, alive. "If I write it," she said, "it won't be instructions. It'll be a warning." He nodded. "That's probably what they need most." That night, she sat alone at her desk. The cursor blinked on the blank document like a tiny heartbeat. She titled it simply, "The Silent Mind, Field Principles of Adaptive Warfare." Then she began to type. Rule 1. The battlefield begins inside your own pulse. Rule 2. Arrogance is louder than any bullet. Silence outlasts them all. Rule 3. Assume nothing. Verify everything. Rule 4. Never mistake movement for progress. Rule 5. Courage is the calm that survives the noise. By dawn, she'd written 10 rules, 10 sentences that distilled everything she had lived and lost. When she finished, she didn't sign her name. She signed a single word, Wraith. The manual circulated quietly at first, shared between instructors, then divisions, then entire branches. Soldiers pinned its pages inside helmets, etched lines onto wristbands. No fanfare, no speeches, just silent adoption. And everywhere it went, results followed. Missions ran smoother, teams argued less. The loudness of fear gave way to measured calm. Somewhere out there, the world was starting to fight the way Eva Rostova thought, not with aggression but with awareness. 1 year later, she received an encrypted message. "Ma'am, it's Drake. We made it home, but not all of us did. Your doctrine saved more lives than I can count. I just wanted you to know that the silence is working." She stared at the message for a long time, the words blurring in the glow of the monitor. Then she typed back, "Silence only works if someone listens." He replied seconds later, "I'm still listening, ma'am." She smiled, a small private thing, and closed the file. Months passed, seasons changed. The academy prepared for another graduation. Thorne insisted she attend the ceremony, her first public appearance in years. The auditorium was full, hundreds of cadets in formation. When her name was announced, the entire hall rose. The applause was thunderous, a storm of respect. She rolled up to the podium, paused, and waited. The clapping died slowly until only silence remained. She looked out at them, the new generation, eyes bright, uniforms perfect, hearts untested. Her voice, when it came, was calm and low. "Some of you think courage is loud," she said. "You think it shouts orders and charges ahead. You're wrong." The room was motionless. Courage is the moment you hold your breath and choose not to panic. It's the pause before the decision, the heartbeat between chaos and clarity. Learn to live in that space and you'll live through anything. She let the silence hang, the weight of it pressing into every chest. Then she gave a single nod, "That's all." It was the shortest speech in Academy history, and the one they would remember the longest. Later that night, when the celebration had faded and the courtyard lights flickered against the marble, she sat beneath the great Republic flag. The air was cool, clean. Drake approached quietly, still in dress uniform, a faint limp in his step. "Ma'am," he said softly. She turned and her eyes softened. "Captain." He smiled awkwardly. It's strange seeing you out here. Thought you'd vanish before the applause died." "I tried," she said, smiling faintly. "The colonel intercepted me." He laughed once, then fell quiet. After a long pause, he said, "You know, we still tell your story out there. Not the classified version, the real one. The stairs, the silence, the crucible." She didn't reply. He continued, "Every time we deploy, someone says your name before the ramp drops. It's like a reminder that we have no right to complain." Eva looked at him, the lines around her eyes deep but gentle. "You don't say my name," she said softly. "You say what it means." He frowned. "And what does it mean?" She thought for a moment. "It means strength doesn't shout, it simply acts." He nodded, eyes wet. "Yes, ma'am." They sat in silence for a while, watching the academy lights shimmer against the marble staircase. The same staircase that had once been cruelty incarnate. Now it was the opposite, a symbol of ascent not upward but inward. Drake finally stood. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Always." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Thank you for kicking me back into humanity." That made her laugh, a genuine low sound. "I didn't kick you, Captain. Life did. I just made sure you landed right." He smiled through the tears and saluted. "Good night, ma'am." She returned the salute with a small motion of her hand, graceful, effortless. "Good night, Drake." He turned to leave, but she called after him softly. "Captain." He stopped. "Keep listening." He nodded once and walked away. When he was gone, Eva looked up at the night sky. Stars glimmered faintly above the academy dome. She thought about all the lessons, all the cadets, all the lives shaped by silence. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to remember the noise, the explosion that took her legs, the screams that followed, the deafening chaos. She remembered what it felt like to crawl through dirt, to taste blood, to shield others with what little remained of herself. She remembered the stillness that came after, the moment when everything was gone, and she had to decide whether to keep living. That moment, that single heartbeat, had defined everything. And as she sat there now in peace, she whispered into the dark, "I chose to keep listening." The wind carried the words up the marble steps and into the night. How does a legacy know when it has outlived the person who built it? Years had passed. The academy had changed uniforms, adopted new technologies, and modernized its training systems, but the heartbeat of the place still pulsed with the rhythm of Eva Rostova's silence. She had grown older, her hair silver now, her face carrying the map of years lived in quiet intensity. But her eyes hadn't dulled. They never would. They carried the same unwavering focus that once froze entire rooms. The world outside had become louder. Conflicts no longer happened in trenches or deserts. They unfolded in data streams, satellites, and endless broadcasts. Yet somehow, amid all that noise, soldiers still quoted her, still whispered her lines before missions, as though her words were armor. "Breathe. Think. Act once." The Wraith hadn't vanished into myth. She had become something deeper, a compass. Colonel Thorne had retired 2 years prior. His replacement, a sharp-minded woman named Brigadier Celeste Harlow, had been one of Eva's early students. She carried herself with the same still, deliberate presence, a living reflection of the doctrine she'd grown up under. When she came to see Eva one morning, she found her in her office surrounded by sunlight and paper. The same desk, the same clean order, not a trace of clutter. "Ma'am," Harlow said respectfully, standing in the doorway. Eva looked up, smiling faintly. "General now, isn't it?" "Brigadier," Harlow corrected softly. "They're saving General for when I make fewer enemies." Eva chuckled. "Then you're probably doing it right." They sat for a while, sharing the kind of comfortable silence that only two people trained to listen could hold. Finally, Harlow broke it. "Ma'am, we're facing a situation." Eva's expression shifted. not alarmed, just attentive. An operation. Worse, Harlow said, a failure. On the large screen behind Eva's desk, the footage flickered to life. A covert team deep in hostile territory. Everything about the video screamed tension, erratic breathing, panicked commands, movement without purpose. A squad pinned down in an alley, gunfire in every direction. And then through the chaos, a young lieutenant shouting, "We can't stay, move, move." Eva watched the footage in silence, her face unreadable. The soldiers broke cover, sprinted across open ground, and were cut down in seconds. The video ended abruptly. Harlow exhaled, her jaw tight. 5 dead, 2 captured. The press is already calling it a disaster. The after-action report says poor coordination, poor communication. Eva didn't respond immediately. Her gaze stayed on the blank screen. Finally, she said, "No, it wasn't communication, it was panic." Harlow frowned. "Ma'am." "They forgot to breathe," Eva said quietly. "Forgot that silence isn't absence, it's control." Harlow leaned forward. "Can it be taught again?" Eva's voice was steady. "It never stopped being taught, they just stopped believing it mattered." She wheeled closer to the window, looking out over the training fields. The young cadets below were practicing simulated drone command, their voices echoing in coordinated rhythm. "They've made war efficient," Eva murmured. "But efficiency without patience is just noise with better timing." Harlow was silent for a long moment. "They're requesting you speak at the memorial, ma'am, for the fallen." Eva's hand stilled on her lap. "I don't do speeches." "I know," Harlow said softly, "but they need to remember who you are, what you taught." Eva's eyes reflected the light like glass. "Then I'll remind them what it costs when they forget." 3 days later, the academy gathered under a gray sky. Hundreds of cadets stood in formation as the flag hung at half-mast. A black podium waited under the rotunda, the same rotunda where once, long ago, laughter had turned cruel and a woman in a wheelchair had fallen down those stairs. Eva sat beside the podium, unmoving, waiting for her turn to speak. Harlow introduced her briefly, but no title, no biography, only. "She taught us to listen." Then Eva rolled forward. The crowd was utterly still. She took a moment before speaking, as if measuring the silence like a battlefield. "When I was your age," she began softly, "I thought silence meant weakness. I thought noise meant power. I was wrong." She paused, the faint hum of wind filling the space between her words. "I've seen men and women die because they shouted when they should have listened. I've seen missions fail because soldiers tried to prove they were fearless instead of accepting they were afraid." Her voice deepened slightly. "Fear isn't your enemy, it's your instrument. If you can hold it steady, it will point you towards survival." A light drizzle began to fall, tapping softly against the marble. "The world is changing," she continued. "War isn't about who shoots first anymore. It's about who sees first, who thinks first, who breathes first." She let that line hang, then added, "Noise kills faster than bullets." The cadets stood in perfect silence, their faces turned toward her, the rain streaking down their uniforms. And then she said something she hadn't planned, something that came not from the doctrine, but from the wound. "I've lived long enough to see arrogance disguised as leadership. I've seen medals pinned on men who mistake command for compassion. Don't become them. Don't worship power. Understand it. Carry it quietly, or it will consume you." Her voice softened again, almost a whisper. "And when you lose someone, when the noise takes them, don't let their silence disappear with them. Let it guide you." She nodded once, then wheeled back. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then grew, rolling like distant thunder across the courtyard. But she didn't stay to hear it. She slipped away down the side path, the sound of rain against her wheels echoing faintly through the corridors. That night she sat in her quarters alone. The memorial flowers still rested on her desk, their scent faint and fading. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old data pad. The screen flickered weakly to life, displaying a list of archived communications. At the top, Drake Miller. She tapped it open. The messages scrolled upward, small notes from years past, tactical updates, gratitude, occasional questions about leadership. The last message was 5 years old. She hesitated, then typed, "Still listening, Captain." There was no reply. She leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "Of course," she murmured, "he's busy saving the world." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. A week later, the message came. Not from Drake, from Command. Field report, Operation Glass Harbor. Subject, Captain D. Miller. Status, missing in action. Eva read it twice. Her hands didn't tremble, but her jaw did tighten just slightly. Harlow entered the office moments later, carrying the same report. Her face said everything. "Intel's limited," she began softly. "Communications lost during extraction. His team's safe, but—" Eva raised a hand. "Don't finish." Harlow hesitated. "Ma'am, I'm sorry." Eva stared out the window for a long time. "Don't be," she said quietly. He was listening. That night, she returned once more to the Crucible. It was empty now, dark, silent. The digital targets offline, the air heavy with memory. She rolled to the center of the floor, the same space where she had once fired the perfect run that changed everything. The same spot where Colonel Thorne had saluted her and called her Wraith. Now, only the hum of old machinery remained. She looked around slowly, her voice a whisper meant only for ghosts. "You did well, Drake. You learned what I couldn't teach, that silence isn't survival, it's sacrifice." Her reflection shimmered faintly on the floor. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small item wrapped in cloth, a medal, tarnished but intact. The Distinguished Service Cross. She placed it on the floor beside her chair. "For the next one," she said softly. And for the first time in decades, she allowed herself to cry not for loss, but for legacy. When morning came, Brigadier Harlow found her still in the Crucible, eyes closed, chin tilted slightly upward, the first rays of dawn painting her in gold. "Ma'am," Harlow whispered, stepping closer. Eva opened her eyes slowly. "He's gone." Harlow nodded, her throat tight. Eva looked toward the screen above them, blank now, but in her mind it replayed everything. The stairs, the laughter, the silence, the shot, the salute, the doctrine. She exhaled. "Then it's time." "For what?" Eva turned her chair toward the exit, her movement steady, deliberate. "For the next generation to teach themselves." As she rolled away, Harlow stood motionless, watching the woman disappear into the morning light. And on the empty Crucible floor, that single medal caught the sun, glinting like a heartbeat frozen in time. Later that week, Harlow held a private ceremony in the rotunda. She placed a small plaque at the base of the marble staircase. It read, "Sergeant First Class Eva Rostova, Wraith. She taught us that silence speaks louder than orders, that stillness saves more than strength, and that the greatest ascent begins when you rise without legs, but without fear." The cadets stopped there every day. Some touched the plaque for luck before drills, some whispered to it before exams, some just stood in silence. All of them listened. In the quiet that followed, the academy carried on louder than ever in the halls, but softer in the heart. The Rostova doctrine lived, not in manuals or speeches, but in moments, the pause before a decision, the breath before a risk, the silence before a storm. And somewhere beyond the reach of sound, a single truth endured. Dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What happens to a lesson when the teacher is gone? Years passed again, and the world changed faster than anyone could keep up. New wars began without soldiers. Machines learned to fight. Drones replaced boots. Silence became data, algorithmic, artificial, predictable. And yet, amid the precision and the noise of a mechanized age, the military academies of 3 continents still taught one subject that couldn't be automated: the Rostova doctrine. Not just as tactics, as philosophy. Her name became part of a curriculum module titled Human Factor Conditioning. But to the instructors who remembered her, those who had stood in her shadow, heard her quiet voice in the Crucible, or sat at her briefings, she was never a module. She was memory. Every instructor carried a story, none the same but all true. She never raised her voice. She could silence a room by walking into it. She didn't teach us how to fight, she taught us how to stop fighting ourselves. And though she was gone from the academy now, retired, living somewhere beyond the reach of command or ceremony, her absence had a weight to it. The halls felt different, the air quieter. Because sometimes, absence is louder than presence. Out in the civilian world, her influence stretched far beyond soldiers. Corporate leaders quoted her in boardrooms. Emergency medics trained under her breathing exercises. Even astronauts studied her control principles for decision-making under pressure. It became known simply as the Wraith Mind. A discipline, a philosophy, a way of standing still when everything else demanded you move. Yet if you asked Eva Rostova about any of it, she would have shrugged and said, "I just wanted them to stop shouting long enough to think." She lived quietly now. A small coastal town, the kind where gulls replaced alarms and the horizon felt infinite. Her home was modest, a single-story cabin with wide glass walls facing the ocean. Every morning, she wheeled herself out onto the porch with a mug of coffee, listening to the tide roll in. The waves had become her new crucible, endless, rhythmic, merciless. And though she no longer wore the uniform, the discipline never left her. She woke at dawn. She trained her arms with resistance bands. She read field reports and listened to global news, still analyzing, still observing. But she didn't interfere, not anymore. Her war was done. Or so she told herself. One morning a letter arrived, real paper, handwritten, unmarked envelope. No one used paper anymore. That alone made her pause. Inside, the handwriting was familiar, sharp, deliberate, exact. "Ma'am, if you're reading this, it means I finally did something right. Or maybe wrong. Either way, I've gone where you once went, between silence and sound. You told me once that silence isn't survival, it's sacrifice. I understand that now. If the world ever forgets what you taught, remind them that noise doesn't win wars. Clarity does. And if anyone asks what the Rostova doctrine means, tell them it's just the art of listening before the last breath. Respectfully, D. Miller." She read it 3 times before folding it carefully back into its envelope. Her hands trembled slightly, not with grief, but with something harder to name, something between pride and pain. The letter had been sent from a classified address, the kind that never explained how it got to you. She placed it in her desk drawer, right next to her medal, and closed it softly. Then she whispered, "Still listening, Captain." Days grew longer, seasons shifted. She aged, but her mind stayed sharp, her gaze steady. Occasionally, reporters tried to find her. They wanted interviews, documentaries, retrospectives. She always declined. "No need to talk," she would say. "The doctrine already did." One young journalist, bold but respectful, once found her at the pier. A quiet afternoon, the sea flat as glass. He held up a recorder. "Ma'am, I just have one question," he said carefully. "Do you ever regret what happened back then? The stairs, the academy, the cruelty?" Eva didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "No," she said. The journalist frowned. "Not even the pain." Eva turned then, and for a moment her gaze carried every battle she'd fought, inside and out. "The pain was the tuition," she said. "It's what bought the lesson." The journalist hesitated, then asked, "And what was the lesson?" Eva smiled faintly. That you can lose everything and still stand taller than the ones who pushed you. He lowered the recorder. There was nothing left to ask. That night the ocean was restless. Waves slammed against the rocks below her porch, as if the sea itself was trying to speak. She sat outside, wrapped in a blanket, the stars faint against the heavy clouds. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about that day again, the fall, the laughter, the pain that followed. But now, when she remembered their faces, the cadets who had mocked her, she didn't feel anger. She felt distance. They were gone, too, lost to time, to regret, to the silence that finds everyone eventually. And in that silence, she found something like peace. A month later, her name resurfaced in global news. A massive cyber attack had crippled several defense grids, panic spread, command systems overloaded, AI units malfunctioned, reacting to false signals. The world froze on the edge of chaos. And then, in a moment of irony no one missed, the first thing the crisis teams did was pull out the Rostova Doctrine. Line 1. Control the internal before confronting the external. The Global Defense Network used her principles to prioritize response, silence the chatter, isolate the noise, stabilize command. In less than 12 hours, the meltdown stopped. The headlines called it the Ghost Protocol. But those who knew better smiled quietly. They knew whose fingerprints were on it. Back on her coast, Eva watched the news unfold without emotion, just a small nod of acknowledgement. She whispered, "Good," they remembered. 2 days later, she received a call from Brigadier Harlow. "Ma'am," Harlow said, her tone careful but urgent. "Command wants to honor you publicly. Global citation, full broadcast." Eva sipped her tea. "I'm not a symbol." Harlow smiled on the other end. "Too late for that, ma'am." There was a pause, the sound of ocean waves filling the gap between them. Harlow said quietly, "They're calling it the era of silence." Eva exhaled slowly. "Then make sure they understand it. Silence isn't peace, it's preparation." "Yes, ma'am." "Don't let them worship the name," Eva said softly. "Make them live the meaning." The line went quiet. Neither woman said goodbye. They didn't need to. In the following weeks, the doctrine spread even further. It was integrated into civilian crisis management, taught in police academies, adopted by pilots, medics, and disaster response units. People began wearing small silver bracelets engraved with 3 words: observe, breathe, decide. No one credited her directly, and she preferred it that way. She'd always said legacy wasn't ownership, it was continuation. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, she sat on her porch again. The air was cool, the sea was calm. She closed her eyes and listened, not for danger, not for memory, just for the rhythm of life. In that rhythm, she could still hear the voices of those she'd taught. Drake's laughter, Thorne's calm baritone, Harlow's precise tone of command. And somewhere beneath it all, the faint echo of her younger self, the cadet who once thought silence was a punishment. That girl had been wrong. Silence was what happened when the world ignored you. It was what happened when you finally stopped needing to explain yourself. As night fell, the tide came in higher, brushing close to the edge of her porch. The air smelled like rain and salt and time. She spoke softly to no one in particular, or maybe to everyone she had ever taught. "Don't chase noise, don't chase victory, chase understanding, the rest will follow." The waves answered in whispers. And in that endless rhythm, Eva Rostova smiled. Because for the first time she realized, the world was finally quiet enough to listen. When does a life stop being a story and become a signal instead? Years had softened the edges of her world. The sea that once roared now murmured like an old friend. The days were simple: sunrise, coffee, silence. Eva Rostova no longer checked the news every morning. The doctrine lived on without her tending. It had learned to breathe on its own. Students she'd never met quoted her. Soldiers who'd never heard her voice carried her words on their wrists. And sometimes, that still astonished her, how something born in humiliation had turned into a language of strength. She often wondered if anyone realized the irony. Her greatest lesson had started with a fall. One evening, she received a visitor. Brigadier Celeste Harlow, gray at the temples now, but eyes still sharp as the morning drills of her cadet days. The two women sat facing the sea, the porch between them lined with empty mugs and years of unsaid things. Harlow finally broke the silence. "They asked me to deliver something," she said, sliding a small datapad across the table. Eva looked down. The screen displayed a recording request, Global Peace Symposium, keynote address by Eva Rostova, Ret. Eva smiled faintly. "They never stop asking, do they?" "They don't," Harlow said. "And maybe they shouldn't. The world's still noisy, ma'am. They need quiet again." Eva's gaze drifted toward the horizon where the sea met the fatting sun. "Quiet isn't given," she said softly. "It's earned." Harlow studied her mentor, the lines of wisdom carved deep, the calm that seemed immovable. "Then earn it one last time," she said. "Speak to them." A week later, the world watched. The hall was enormous, tiered seats filled with officers, diplomats, doctors, and cadets. Every language translated her words in real time, but when she rolled onto the stage, the translators went silent. Because silence was part of the lesson. She paused at the podium, looked out over the thousands of faces. And then, with the ease of someone who had long ago stopped performing, she began. "When I first learned to shoot," she said, "I was told the secret was steady hands. That wasn't true. The secret was steady thought." She waited, letting the words settle. "Then I was told that to lead, you must speak loudly enough to be heard. That wasn't true either. To lead, you must listen deeply enough to understand." Her voice was quiet but carried through the hall like gravity. "I spent half my life fighting noise, the kind made by war, and the kind made by fear. And I've learned something that might help you." She leaned slightly closer to the microphone. "Peace isn't silence. Peace is what happens when silence becomes understanding." The audience sat still. No coughs, no murmurs, just the heartbeat of thousands waiting for the next breath. "And so," she said, her tone softening, "if you remember nothing else I've taught, remember this. You cannot command others until you've conquered your own noise." She smiled faintly, almost wistfully. "That's all." The applause rose slowly, like dawn breaking, restrained, reverent, overwhelming. But she was already gone before it peaked. Back on the coast, that night was different. The air was warm, still, almost heavy. The ocean glowed faintly beneath a crescent moon. Eva sat on her porch, a blanket around her shoulders. Her breathing was slower now, calm but shallow. She watched the horizon, her mind wandering through memories that played like fragments of film. The echo of boots on marble. The laughter that once cut. The silence that rebuilt her. Drake Miller's voice over the comm, "Still listening, ma'am." She whispered it aloud, "Still listening." Then she closed her eyes. The next morning the caretaker found her still in her chair, eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips, coffee cup empty beside her. Peaceful, unafraid, gone. On the table lay a single sheet of paper, handwritten, her last note. "Don't mourn the silence, continue it." The news traveled quietly at first. No headlines screamed it, just a few short dispatches. Sergeant Eva Rostova, known worldwide for the Rostova Doctrine, passed away at 87. But word spread beyond the wires. Veterans shared her lines online. Cadets whispered them before sleep. Commanders ordered a moment of silence, not out of ritual but reverence. And in those minutes of quiet, her presence returned. At the academy, the rotunda filled once more. Brigadier Harlow stood before the marble plaque. A candle flickered at its base. She addressed the assembled cadets, hundreds of them, standing at attention. "When I was your age," Harlow began, "I thought leadership meant never showing weakness. Then she taught me that strength and silence are the same muscle, both require control." She glanced up at the ceiling, her voice steady but full. "She didn't die famous, she died heard." The crowd didn't clap. They stood in silence for 1 full minute, the way she would have wanted. Then, almost as one, they saluted. Weeks later, a new mural appeared above the Crucible training hall. Not of her face, not of her chair. Just a silhouette, a soldier seated head bowed, watching the horizon. Below it, a single quote. "Dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." No signature, none needed, everyone knew. Across the world, her doctrine found a new form. In hospitals, surgeons paused before critical procedures, taking one measured breath, the Restova breath. In disaster zones, rescuers moved with the quiet precision she taught through words decades old. And in space, orbiting above the Earth she once defended, a pilot looked down at the blue curve below and whispered her line before initiating a crucial re-entry burn. "Observe, breathe, decide." It wasn't worship, it was continuation. And somewhere beyond that sky, beyond time and title, if silence truly has an echo, hers was endless. Because the doctrine she left behind wasn't about war. It was about being human when the world demands machines. It was about remembering that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just endures quietly. On the anniversary of her death, a young cadet walked the academy staircase at dawn, the same staircase. He paused halfway up, staring at the bronze plaque embedded in the wall. He had heard the story 100 times, but now, standing there, it felt different. He whispered under his breath, "They pushed her down right here." Another cadet beside him nodded. "Yeah, but she made the world stand up." The first cadet smiled slightly. "Guess that's what real power sounds like." "Like what?" He looked up, the rising sun catching the marble. "Like silence." Later that morning, drills began. Orders echoed, boots struck the ground, the academy roared with life again. But under it all, in the measured rhythm of every breath, every step, every pause before command, she lived. Not as a ghost. Not as a legend. As a standard. The wraith hadn't disappeared. She'd become the space between every heartbeat that still fought to mean something. And somewhere in that vast, unending quiet, a voice, calm, steady, unbroken, seemed to whisper once more. "Stillness is strength. Silence saves. Dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The wind carried the words through the courtyard, across the training fields, into the open sky, until they were indistinguishable from the breath of the world itself. Because that's what she had always been teaching. Not how to fight. How to live.